Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and today we're going to take a look at something kind of interesting, kind of unique, and that is the Evercade handheld put out by a company called Blaze. Now I guess on the surface, this looks like perhaps another emulation system that we've seen come out over the last couple years. Well, this is a little bit different because unlike other systems, this actually comes with its own proprietary physical cartridges. This handheld was really designed by people who understand the retro gaming market and how important physical media is, and so it takes a really interesting approach to this. So before we take a look at the handheld itself, just know that it plays these multi-game cartridges which come with multiple games on one cartridge for about $20, and they're all fully licensed. However, before we get started, I do want to mention that Blaze Entertainment sent me this unit for review, but nobody is reviewing this content before it goes live, and of course all of the opinions are my own. So for this review, they sent me the premium pack, which comes with the handheld, as well as 3 of those game cartridges, or about 36 games, as well as most of the other cartridge packs that they plan on selling day one when this launches. You can see some of the publishers here, a lot of them that you'll be very familiar with, like Data East, Atari, Namco, Interplay, but then some other ones that I thought were kind of interesting here. Technos, as well as Piko Interactive, and then Megacat Studios. And each of these cartridges has anywhere from 6 to 20 games on them, and there are currently over 120 games that you can get if you get all of these packs. And what's really cool about this is that when you open up the clamshell, there is a full color manual included in every single one of these, and it's very specific to that publisher. So you'll open up the manual, and right off the bat, it'll have a little bit of information about that publisher and its history. And then every single game included on the cartridge has both its controls as well as some information about the game, and sometimes even hints. And as you can see here, it's printed in full color. So again, it's very much designed for retro game collectors like me who care about this sort of stuff. Now we're gonna dive into those cartridges and I'll show you a bunch of gameplay footage, but first let's check out the handheld itself. Now you'll notice that the size of this is comparable to, say, the Sony PSP, maybe a little bit larger, but the screens definitely are very similar. And here it is compared to the Nintendo Switch. So obviously the Switch is much larger, but I feel like the Evercade is definitely a little bit more portable. You could certainly put it in your back pocket just fine. Notice that the D-pad on the left is very retro inspired. It feels very similar to the one that you would get on the Sega Genesis. Walking around the front of it here, you have a menu button, as well as start and select, and 4 face buttons over there. You also have 2 speakers, left and right. And then on the bottom, you have your volume up and down, as well as a place to plug in your headphones. And then over on the right there is where you plug in a micro USB to charge the 2000 milliamp battery, which is included in here. So it's a rechargeable battery, and it lasts for, they say, about 4 to 5 hours. And in my testing, that seems to be pretty accurate. On the top, you have 2 shoulder buttons, which are clicky and are very comfortable, actually. You also have a power switch, and then over there is a mini HDMI out. So you can connect this to your HD television and play there, and that's actually how I'm going to be capturing the footage for this video as well. And then, of course, there is the cartridge slot, which is the part of this handheld that I feel is the most unique about it, is that it actually has its own proprietary physical format. The cartridges themselves are decently sized, have a nice little label on them, and they remind me of the Neo Geo Pocket Color cartridges that came out, obviously, many years ago, but they're very similar in size, in weight, and also thickness. It immediately pops up the menu, like there is almost no load time, and as a matter of fact, the menu itself actually is very quick, very zippy. Games look and play fine while running on the handheld. You see me here playing a game called Tanzer by Megacat Studios. That is a 2D platforming run and gun game that I was having a blast with. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the internals of this handheld are, but I assume it's running some sort of emulator. They talk a little bit about that on their website. So in theory, there should be a little bit of lag, although, again, they address lag on their site and say that they've really worked hard to try to minimize that as much as possible. And to be honest, I didn't really feel any while I was playing a bunch of games. And you'll notice in a lot of this footage that the games are not taking up the entire screen real estate, and that is by design because by default it will be in 4:3, which I think a lot of gamers like me, we pretty much prefer because that's how they should look. But you do have the option, if you bring up the menu, to switch it to full screen if you wish. And a really nice feature of the Evercade is the ability to plug in a micro HDMI cable and then output the video to your HD television, which is great if you just want to play it on a big screen, or in this case, if you have a YouTube channel or you stream, well, you can easily output it there as well. And what's nice is that most games support save states, so anytime that you want to do that, you just hit the menu button and then you can do a snapshot of where you're at in the game and then come back to it at any time. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some individual multi-game cartridge packs, and the first one we're going to take a look at is the Data East Collection, Volume 1. So this has 10 games included in it, and again, it's going to be for about $20. And it's a mix of 8-bit and 16-bit games. Let's go ahead and check out the main menu here, and in there you can change the screen ratio either from 4:3 or to full screen. There's a bunch of different language options, and then you just hit the start button if you want to launch the game. Here we have the game Two Crude Dudes. Now I have to say that is a contender for possibly the best name of any video game ever. Here we have the home console version of Karate Champ, a game I used to try to play in the arcades but I was always terrible at, but I always appreciated that it was at least an attempt to be a little bit more realistic when it came to karate. Here is Magical Drop 2, which is a puzzle game that I actually enjoy quite a bit. And you see the Super Nintendo version here. And this is Midnight Resistance, which is a run and gun shoot 'em up game, very similar to Contra. This game originally came out on the Sega Mega Drive/Genesis. And then here is Joe and Mac 2, Lost in the Tropics, which originally came out on the Super Nintendo. Really fun platforming game. Now let's check out the Interplay Collection 2 cartridge, which comes with 6 games, including Clay Fighter 2, originally for the Super Nintendo. This is my first time playing this game, and I was not overly impressed. I think it looks kind of cool because it has that pre-rendered look, but probably not the best fighter. I definitely had a lot more fun with the game Claymates. This game originally came out on the Super Nintendo, and as you can see here, it's an action 2D platformer. But certainly a better game is, of course, Earthworm Jim 2. This is a classic, and it plays really well on this system. There are currently 2 collections of Namco games, each one of them having 11 games on the cartridge. And the first one I had to check out is Battle Cars. This is a futuristic car battling game that's using a bunch of Mode 7, and very playable, really fun game. I like this one a lot. Also included on here is one of my favorite top-down shooters, especially when I was a kid in arcades. That, of course, is Xevious. And I like Xevious because it had just such a unique sound effects. Like when you shot and destroyed the enemies, it didn't sound like normal explosions. They sounded like breaking glass. I always loved that. Also included on the Namco collection is a top-down shooter that I enjoy an awful lot. You see it here. It's called Phelios. But you may be starting to pick up on something that I did as well when I was playing these games, and that is, for some reason, they've chose to include the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis versions instead of the much superior arcade versions. It got me wondering. So I emailed the people at Blaze Entertainment, the people who made the Evercade, and I was asking them, like, was there a reason why you guys chose to put the console versions on the handheld instead of, the arcade versions when available? And the answer I got back actually, made a lot of sense. They said that their handheld is definitely powerful enough to run the arcade versions, but they felt like it'd be kind of a jarring experience for the consumer to be dealing with the different aspect ratios depending on the game that they're going to try to run. As you guys know, old console games are typically in 4:3 aspect ratio, but in the arcades, especially in the 80s and early 90s, well, often they would be taller and a little bit, narrower. So instead, they decided to just focus for now on the initial release on the home console versions. But they did give me a little bit of insight into their plans for 2020, and they said that they are definitely looking into doing a arcade-specific release in the future. So for instance, one of the companies is Namco, and they're working on an arcade collection for later on this year. Moving along to some other multi-game cartridges, here is the Mega Cat Studios Collection Volume 1, and this comes with 10 games. Now, if you're not familiar with Mega Cat Studios, they are an independent developer and publisher that puts out retro-styled games in that Super Nintendo Genesis style, but again, they're all brand new. And I think this is pretty cool that they are doing a dedicated cartridge with 10 of these games on it, because yes, you can get these games on other systems. Often they are download only, but you know, it's cool to have a collection of this independent developer. I thought this is pretty cool. And they've got some pretty fun games in here. I've already shown the 2D platformer Tanzer, but I also want to mention Coffee Crisis, because Coffee Crisis is a Genesis style beat 'em up game, but it's got a hilarious story where aliens attack, and basically these baristas that are really into heavy metal decide to try and save the world. And what's cool about the game is the developers, while making it, reached out to a bunch of YouTubers like me and asked if they could put us in the game. So I'm in this game as a boss. Actually, it's like a mid-level boss, as well as a bunch of other YouTubers. So it's a really cool game. Definitely check it out. Another cool collection of games is from Piko Interactive. So for this particular one, they've included 20 games on this one cartridge, which is a hell of a deal. Now, if you're not familiar with Piko Interactive, what they do is they basically buy and resurrect games that either never made it to North America. So sometimes they're like Chinese or Taiwan specific released games, but then they bring them over to North America and add English. But other times they are unfinished games, or maybe broken games that never got released or something like that. And so Piko Interactive goes in there with their developers and finishes them up and then releases them for our market. And so this is a collection of 20 of their games, and some of them you might be familiar with because maybe the license expired, or maybe you played it on the the Famicom or the Super Famicom, stuff like that. But yeah, it's a neat little collection. Next up is the Technos collection, which comes with 8 games. Many of these you're going to be familiar with, including Double Dragon 2, River City Ransom, Dodgeball, a bunch of good games in here that a lot of people are familiar with. And they also sent 2 volumes of classic Atari games. So each one of these has 20 games on it, and like many of the other compilations that you've seen in the past, it's not just Atari 2600 games. They also mix in Atari 7800 games, which honestly is a good thing, because sometimes the 7800 version of a game is actually the better one. You know, it's funny because people know that I love the Atari 2600. I grew up with it. And so they'll ask me what games they should get when they first start collecting for that system. But I always have to pause and kind of think about it for a second, because honestly, Atari branded games aren't necessarily the best on the console. And so while this collection is good, don't get me wrong, I mean, there's some classics on here and games that I really like, but for the most part, actually, it's always the Activision games that came out on the 2600 are the ones that were the best that you could play. So I would love to see them come out in the future with an Activision 2600 collection. That would be awesome. That said, there are some great games on here, including Asteroids, both the 2600 version and the 7800 version. You also have games like Centipede and Millipede, as well as Missile Command, still a lot of fun to play today. Food Fight, a really fun 7800 game. Bowling, it looks dumb, but it actually is a lot of fun. And of course, Yar's Revenge, one of the greatest games made for the 2600. And then the last question that I had about the Evercade, and I think it's one that a lot of you are going to have as well, is that wouldn't it be nice if we could load our own games onto it? And so they actually addressed this on their website because, like I said, I think a lot of people were kind of curious about it. And so they acknowledge that it is a bit tricky because they are working with publishers and developers that want to protect their IPs, their intellectual properties, and not promote piracy. But they do say that perhaps in the future that they could release sort of a developer SD kit that would come in the form of a cartridge that you could then put on your own ROM. So I think that would be pretty cool. I would love to see what that looks like. So I guess we'll have to stay tuned. So the Evercade's going to come out in April, and there's going to be 2 versions of it. So the standard edition includes 1 cartridge, and that's going to retail for $80. And then there's going to be a premium edition, which includes 3 cartridges, and that's going to come out for $100. If you want to learn more about it, I'll put a link down in the video description below. So guys, that's my review of the Evercade, and you might be wondering if I have anything bad to say about it, and not really. I mean, it functions exactly as advertised. I didn't run into really any problems whatsoever, and I love the fact that it is designed to be for retro game collectors like me. The idea of doing these multi-game cartridges, you know, in a physical format with clamshell cases for protection and full color manuals and all of these games included in there, plus the video out. Yeah, I just think it's kind of a bold and crazy idea. I dig it, I really do. So I'd love to know from you guys what collections you'd like to see them put out in the future. There's a lot of possibilities here, so it'd be interesting to see what you guys say. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.